In 1997, David Bowie did something nobody in the history of the music business had ever done. He didn't sell his songs. He didn't sign them over to a label or trade them to a publisher or take a lump sum in exchange for the catalog he'd spent 30 years building. He did something stranger and much smarter. He went to Wall Street and sold 10 years of his own future income, 25 albums, 287 songs, everything he'd recorded before 1990. Ziggy Stardust, Heroes, The Man Who Sold the World. Every dollar those recordings would earn for the next decade, sold in advance to an insurance company for $55 million in cash. At the end of those 10 years, he got all of it back. Here's what makes this extraordinary. 5 years later, Bowie publicly predicted the exact collapse that was about to destroy the value of what he'd just sold. He saw it coming. He said so out loud. And he still walked away whole because of how he'd structured the thing. This is a money story. Let's get into it. To understand why Bowie needed $55 million, you have to understand what had happened to him 20 years earlier. In the early 70s, a man named Tony DeFries managed Bowie through a company called Main Man. DeFries built the machine that turned a struggling English singer into Ziggy Stardust, and he was very good at it. He also held a share of the business, according to Bowie's later accounts, that Bowie hadn't fully understood when he signed. Bowie ended the relationship with him in the mid-70s, but breaking with a manager and undoing a contract are two different things, and pieces of Bowie's early catalog rights stayed tangled up in arrangements he no longer controlled and had never really chosen. So by the mid-90s, Bowie was enormously famous. His catalog was extremely valuable, and he did not have full, clean control of it because of paperwork signed by a much younger man who wanted a record deal more than he wanted good terms. Buying those rights back would take a large amount of cash at once. He had two conventional options, and both were bad. He could sell the catalog outright, which would solve the cash problem and permanently destroy the asset. Or he could go to a bank for a loan and be told what every artist in that era was told. Recorded music is not collateral. A song is not a building. You cannot repossess Ziggy Stardust. So he invented a third option. The idea came out of a lunch, a couple of years before it happened, between Bowie's people and a financier named Richard Sandor, an investment banker named David Pullman, then at Fahnestock & Company, structured and sold it. The mechanism is simpler than it sounds, and it's worth digging into, because that's the whole video. A bond is a loan you can sell. When a company issues a bond, an investor hands over cash today in exchange for a promise of scheduled payments over some number of years. What makes the bond worth buying is whatever backs it. The company's revenue, its property, something reliable that generates money. Bowie's insight was that his back catalog was exactly that. Those 25 albums generated royalties every single year, predictably, whether or not he did anything at all. People bought the records, radio played them, films licensed them. That was a revenue stream, and revenue streams are what bonds are made of. So the deal was built like this. Bowie pledged future royalties from those 287 songs as collateral. Investors would receive the royalty income for 10 years. In exchange, Bowie received $55 million up front. The bonds carried a 7.9% annual interest rate and a 10-year maturity. Moody's rated them A3, solid investment grade, a low expected risk of default, and a single buyer bought the entire issue privately, the Prudential Insurance Company of America. These were never sold to the public. One institution wrote the check. Now, here is the detail that separates this from every other music money story on this channel. Bowie never transferred ownership of the masters. He pledged the income. He kept the asset. The recording stayed his the entire time. Legally, permanently his. and the arrangement was structured so that when the bonds matured, the income reverted to him automatically. He had converted a decade of future earnings into immediate cash without giving up a single song. That's pretty genius. He used part of that money to do exactly what he'd raised it for: buy back the rights that had been tangled up since the Main Man years. He spent the proceeds of his catalog on repairing his ownership of that same catalog. The financial press called them Bowie bonds. They were the first securities in history backed by a performer's future earnings, and they made every bank on Wall Street realize that a song could be collateral after all. Then the industry went through a major change. Napster launched in 1999. Within about 2 years, the way people acquired recorded music changed permanently, and the royalty income that 30 years of the record business had treated as a law of nature began to fall. Remember what was backing those bonds? Not Bowie's fame, not his future albums, the royalty stream from 25 specific albums, a stream that assumed people would keep buying records the way they always had. In 2004, Moody's downgraded the Bowie bonds from A3 to Baa3, one notch above junk. The agency was explicit about why. Revenue from the underlying assets had come in lower than expected, because sales of recorded music had fallen off. Prudential was holding an investment-grade security that had quietly become the riskiest thing in that part of its portfolio. But go back 2 years, to 2002, and read what Bowie told the New York Times. He said the absolute transformation of everything we ever thought about music would happen within 10 years, and that nothing was going to stop it. He said he saw no point pretending otherwise. He said he was fully confident that copyright would no longer exist in 10 years, and that authorship and intellectual property were in for a bashing. And then the line that people still quote, "Music itself," he said, "is going to become like running water or electricity." He said that in 2002. Streaming as we know it did not exist. He was describing precisely the collapse in the value of recorded music royalties, the collapse that would downgrade his own bonds 2 years later. And he was describing it calmly, as an obvious fact, to a newspaper. The man who securitized his royalties publicly announced that royalties were about to stop meaning what everyone assumed they meant. And here is the outcome. The bonds matured in 2007. They were redeemed in full. There was no default. Prudential got its money, the arrangement ended on schedule, and the rights to the income from those 287 songs reverted cleanly and completely to David Bowie. He had taken $55 million out of an asset in 1997, watched the market for that asset deteriorate badly, and gotten the asset back anyway. David Bowie died in January of 2016. He left behind a catalog he owned outright. Not a share of it, not a percentage, not a residual interest. The whole thing, unencumbered, because a decade of borrowing against it had ended with everything returning to him. 6 years later, in January of 2022, his estate sold the publishing catalog to Warner Chappell Music. The reported price was upwards of $250 million. $55 million in 1997, without selling anything. $250 million in 2022, when his family chose to sell. The first deal didn't cost him the second number. It's why the second number existed. Had he taken the conventional route in 1997, sold the catalog to solve the cash problem, the 1997 buyer would have collected that $250 million, not his estate. Most money advice treats debt as the opposite of ownership. Borrowing is what you do when you don't have enough. Owning is what you do when you have. Bowie's deal shows that's backward. Borrowing against something you own is one of the few financial moves that gives you cash without costing you the thing that generates it. Selling ends the relationship. Borrowing pauses it. That's the lesson. You can raise money against what you own without giving it up. And the difference between those two choices doesn't show up for years, which is exactly why people get it wrong. The other half is about who carries the risk. Bowie was paid up front in $1997 against expectations from a world that was about to end. And when those expectations proved wrong, the loss sat with Prudential, not with him. There's a version of this where Bowie looks like a genius who timed the market. The real version is more useful. He didn't get out at the top. He built an arrangement where being wrong about the future was survivable. Most people will never securitize anything. But almost everyone eventually faces the same choice he faced in 1997. You need money now. And the fastest way to get it is to permanently sell something that would have kept paying you. Bowie found the third door. He got the money, kept the songs, and let somebody else carry the risk that the world would change. It did. He was fine. If this one hit you, hit subscribe, because next time we're going back almost 100 years to a man who looked at the same problem from the other end. Bowie borrowed against what he owned. This man decided that owning the work wasn't enough. You had to own the thing that delivered the work to people. So he and 3 others built their own company to do it. And it paid his family for the next century. You don't want to miss it.